Cricut machines are pretty incredible. Not only do they open doors to create awesome custom crafts, but if you really take advantage of the potential on these machines, you can create something rather epic. With that being said, going into my first Cricut project was pretty intimidating. The company sent me a package with the Cricut Maker, Cricut Joy, and loads of vinyls and tools to discover. It was really a lot to digest. I won't lie to you and say that I didn't feel a bit overwhelmed by all of this at first. Not knowing what tool does what left me feeling lost in the world of shimmering paper and refined blades. But I had a plan. Instead of tackling the basics at first like keyrings and shirts, I would make a giant light box and slap a smart globe into it for my gaming setup. A gaming lightbox is a rather ambitious project to start off with first, but I'm glad I did it. I not only learned so much more about the Cricut range, but I also stress tested the machines to see just how much they can handle before it becomes a challenge. The gaming lightbox of this size is also not the most practical thing to make either. Sure, if you're planning on doing simpler designs it would be great, but I really went to town with some really detailed images here. By the time the project was done, I learned so much more than I expected. For starters, I had no idea that cutting a complex design on the chipboard would take about 16 hours to complete. Sure, the chipboard is great if you have simpler designs, but if you're cutting an image with dozens of shapes and objects, the machine's going to take a long time to work its way through all of the passes on the chipboard. You see, the blade doesn't cut the entire chipboard at once. Instead, it works its way through the chipboard layers, but slowly slicing through each piece of the cardboard layer by layer. So the idea of this gaming lightbox revolved around having 6 sides. 4 of them would sit on the outer side of the light. There was also a top lid and a bottom holder. The thing you need to keep in mind about Cricut is that when you import something into the Design Space app, it cuts away the white and leaves behind the black. So this sort of project won't use any color whatsoever. Instead, the characters and items I wanted to have were black and the background was white. The same goes for the actual box itself too. I designed each square with the ability to slot into the side faces by removing some of the black, leaving a sort of clip behind. The bottom, for example, had 12 teeth that would then slot into the 3 holes on each of the 4 walls. The walls then featured larger teeth and smaller teeth, so they also clipped into one another. The bottom then had a 4 cm circle cutout where I screwed in the light fixture. Designing the faces for this Cricut Lightbox was probably the best part of the project. It was challenging to keep the blacks and the whites organized, and I also learned just how precise the knife blade had to be in order to cut out the design. I made my first Super Mario cutout and I completely had to redo it. I realized that some of the objects on the image were just too thin to cut out. For example, Mario's M on his head was just super thin when it finished cut and it fell apart. I then refined a lot of the image by painting in the black to thicken the lines where they were too thin and erasing where they were too thick. Sure, in the end this isn't perfect, but the more I messed up, the more I kind of mastered the cutting process. I went with a full Nintendo Lightbox because everybody knows and loves Nintendo. The first side was a Super Mario themed face, with Paper Mario being the center point and his surroundings featuring iconic characters and locations from the series. The second side was then a Legend of Zelda one. This was a little bit more challenging because unlike Mario, the Zelda series isn't as cartoonish, so items and objects were a lot more detailed. I had to completely rethink some of the placements of objects due to this. For example, the Master Sword's hilt had to be simplified to avoid it being damaged while being cut. I also had to rethink how I placed some of the objects onto the top and the bottom of the face. The last cut was a Pokemon one. This was the most challenging to do simply due to how detailed each Pokemon was. The legendary birds, for example, were highly intricate and required some careful attention when cutting. The biggest takeaway from this project was how it taught me so much more about the Cricut machines. I learned that cutting chipboard isn't a quick process. It also taught me how to approach a project like this when using a third-party app like Affinity Photo to do the black and white design in PNG before importing it into Cricut Design Space. I also learned that the chipboard, while being 28 by 28 centimeters, doesn't actually use the entire square. I had to resize each of the chipboard sheets, which was designed at 28 by 28 to 26.5 centimeters each. I love the Cricut machines, but I do think they waste a lot of material when it comes to these restrictions. Why couldn't I just use the full 28 centimeter square? I had the design for it, but the design app refused to use it. If I was able to cut out the full 28 centimeter light box, it would have been so much bigger and the waste would have been kept to a minimum. I also learned that when creating designs, what you see on the screen doesn't always come out perfectly when it's being cut, especially when it comes to chipboard. Make sure you have larger white space than the image. For example, under Princess Zelda's arms, I raised more space on the design so it looked proportionate when it was cut, else she had small little gaps under her arms. Going a little overboard with the erasing and the black painting on the PNG definitely helped a lot. You also have to be careful when it comes to objects that are too small and detailed. Often these get completely destroyed when the cutting process is taking place. I then used tissue paper which I ironed flat and glued it onto the faces. I used PVC glue for this. I then used super glue to glue all the faces together. Lastly, I made a stand using the Cricut machine too. I took 2 rectangle PNGs and squashed the top of each one. I then made the holes at the bottom of the box and slid these chipboard rectangles into them. As the rectangle got thicker, they got stuck into the hole and each shape acted as a leg. I then used super glue to secure them into place. I used a lot of super glue here. Everything is super glued. Lastly, the light is a Yeelight. The smart globe looks incredible in the box, especially thanks to the dimmer presets that give the box a faint glow. Great for ambient lighting in the room.